So we're starting at Deuteronomy 21, chapter 21, verse 10. That's where we will begin. And let me read the blessing here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech ha'olam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzavanu la'asok b'devrei Torah. Blessed are you, Hashem, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with commandments and commanded us to study words of Torah. When you go out to war against your enemies, and Adonai your God hands them over to you, and you take prisoners, and you see among the prisoners a woman who looks good to you, and you feel attracted to her, and want her as your wife, you are to bring her home to your house, where she will shave her head, cut her fingernails, and remove her prison clothing. She will stay there in your house, mourning her father and mother for a full month. After which, you may go in to have sexual relations with her and be her husband, and she will be your wife. In the event that you lose interest in her, you are to let her go wherever she wishes, but you may not sell her for money or treat her like a slave, because you humiliated her. If a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved wives have borne him children, and if the firstborn son is the child of the unloved wife, then when it comes time for him to pass his inheritance on to his sons, he may not give the inheritance due to the firstborn to the son of the loved wife in place of the son of the unloved wife, who is in fact the firstborn. No, he must acknowledge as firstborn the son of the unloved wife by giving him a double portion of everything he owns. For he is the first fruits of his manhood, and the right of the firstborn is his. If a man has a stubborn, rebellious son who will not obey what his father or mother says, and even after they discipline him, he still refuses to pay attention to them, then his father and mother are to take hold of him and bring him out to the leaders of his town at the gate of that place, and say to the leaders of his town, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He doesn't pay attention to us, lives wildly, gets drunk." Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. In this way they will put an end to such wickedness among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid. If someone has committed a capital crime and is put to death, then hung on a tree, his body is not to remain all night on the tree, but you must bury him the same day, because a person who has been hanged has been cursed by God, so that you will not defile your land, which Adonai your God is giving you to inherit. Chapter 22. You are not to watch your brother's ox or sheep straying and behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must bring it back to your brother. If your brother is not close by, or you don't know who the owner is, you are to bring it home to your house, and it will remain with you until your brother asks for it. then you are to give it back to him. You are to do the same with his donkey, his coat, or anything else of your brother's that he loses. If you find something he lost, you must not ignore it. If you see your brother's donkey or an ox collapsed on the road, you may not behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must help him get it up on its feet again. A woman is not to wear men's clothing, and a man is not to put on woman's clothing. For whoever does these things is detestable to Adonai, your God. If, as you're walking along, you happen to see a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the chicks or the eggs, you are not to take the mother with the chicks. You must let the mother go, but you may take the chicks for yourself, so that things will go well with you, and you will prolong your life. When you build a new house, you must build a low wall around your roof. Otherwise, someone may fall from it, and you will be responsible for his death. You're not to sow two kinds of seed between your rows of vines. If you do, both the two harvested crops and the yield from the vines must be forfeited. You are not to plow with an ox and a donkey together. You're not to wear clothing woven with two kinds of thread, wool and linen, together. You are to make for yourselves twisted cords on the four corners of the garment you wrap around yourself. If a man marries a woman, has sexual relations with her, and then, having come to dislike her, brings false charges against her, and defames her character by saying, I married this woman, but when I had intercourse with her, I did not find evidence that she was a virgin. Then the girl's father and mother are to take the evidence of the girl's virginity to the leaders of the town at the gate. The girl's father will say to the leaders, I let my daughter marry this man, but he hates her. So he has brought false charges that he didn't find evidence of her virginity. Yet here is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they will lay the cloth before the town leaders. And the leaders of that town are to take the man, punish him, and fine him 2.5 pounds of silver shekels, which they will give to the girl's father, because he has publicly defamed a virgin of Israel. She will remain his wife, and he is forbidden from divorcing her as long as he lives. But if the charge is substantiated, that evidence for the girl's virginity could not be found, then they are to lead the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of her town will stone her to death, because she has committed in Israel the disgraceful act of being a prostitute while still in her father's house. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. If a man is found sleeping with a woman who has a husband, both of them must die. The man who went to bed with the woman, and the woman too. In this way, you will expel such wickedness from Israel. If a girl who is a virgin is engaged to a man, and another man comes upon her in the town and has sexual relations with her, you are to bring them both out to the gate of the city and stone them to death. The girl, because she didn't cry out for help there in the city, and the man, because he has humiliated his neighbor's wife. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. But if the man comes upon the engaged girl out in the countryside, and the man grabs her and has sexual relations with her, then only the man who had intercourse with her is to die. You'll do nothing to the girl, because she has done nothing deserving of death. The situation is like the case of the man who attacks his neighbor and kills him. For he found her in the countryside, and the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. If a man comes upon a girl who is a virgin, but who is not engaged, and he grabs her and has sexual relations with her, and they are caught in the act, then the man who had intercourse with her must give to the girl's father 1.25 pounds of silver shekels, and she will become his wife, because he humiliated her. He may not divorce her as long as he lives. Chapter 23. A man is not to take his father's wife, thus violating his father's rights. A man with crushed or damaged private parts may not enter the assembly. A son of a forbidden marriage may not enter the assembly of Adonai, nor may his descendants down to the 10th generation enter the assembly of Adonai. No Ammoni or Moavi may enter the assembly of Adonai, nor may any of his descendants down to the 10th generation ever enter the assembly of Adonai, because they did not supply you with food and water when you were on the road after leaving Egypt, and because they hired Balaam, the son of Beor, from Petor and Aram Naharaim to put a curse on you. But Adonai your God would not listen to Balaam. Rather, Adonai your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because Adonai your God loved you. So you are never to seek their peace or well-being as long as you live. But you are not to detest an Edomi, because he is your brother. And you are not to detest an Egyptian, because you lived as a foreigner in his land. The 3rd generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of Adonai. When you're in camp, at war with your enemies, you are to guard yourselves against anything bad. If there is a man among you who is unclean because of a nocturnal emission, he is to go outside the camp. He is not to enter the camp. When evening arrives, he is to bathe himself in water, and after sunset, he may enter the camp. Also, you are to have an area outside the camp to use as a latrine. You must include a trowel with your equipment. And when you relieve yourself, you are to dig a hole first, and afterwards cover your excrement. For Adonai your God moves about in your camp to rescue you and to hand over your enemies to you. Therefore, your camp must be a holy place. Adonai should not see anything indecent among you, or he will turn away from you. If a slave has escaped from his master and taken refuge with you, you are not to hand him back to his master. Allow him to stay with you in whichever place suits him best among your settlements. Do not mistreat him. No woman of Israel is to engage in ritual prostitution, and no man of Israel is to engage in ritual homosexual prostitution. Nothing earned through heterosexual or homosexual prostitution is to be brought into the house of Adonai your God in fulfillment of any vow. For both of these are abhorrent to Adonai, your God. You're not to lend at interest to your brother, no matter whether the loan is of money, food, or anything else that can earn interest. To an outsider, you may lend at interest, but to your brother, you're not to lend at interest, so that Adonai, your God, will prosper you in everything you set out to do in the land you're entering in order to take possession of it. When you make a vow to Adonai, your God, you're not to delay in fulfilling it, for Adonai, your God, will certainly demand it of you, and your failure to do so will be your sin. If you choose not to make a vow at all, that will not be a sin for you. But if a vow passes your lips, you must take care to perform it according to what you voluntarily vowed to Adonai, your God, what you promised in words spoken aloud. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat enough grapes to satisfy your appetite, but you're not to put any in your basket. When you enter your neighbor's field of growing grain, you may pluck ears with your hand, but you're not to put a sickle to your neighbor's grain. Chapter 24. Suppose a man marries a woman and consummates the marriage, but later finds her displeasing because he has found her offensive in some respect. He writes her a divorce document, gives it to her, and sends her away from his house. She leaves his house, goes and becomes another man's wife. But the second husband dislikes her and writes her a get, gives it to her and sends her away from his house. Or the second husband whom she married dies. In such a case, her first husband who sent her away may not take her again as his wife, because she is now defiled. It would be detestable to Adonai, and you're not to bring about sin in the land Adonai, your God, is giving you as your inheritance. If a man has recently married his wife, he is not to be subject to military service. He is to be free of external obligations and left at home for 1 year to make his new wife happy. No one may take a mill or even an upper millstone as collateral for a loan, because that would be taking as collateral the debtor's very means of sustenance. If a man kidnaps any of his brothers, fellow members of the community of Israel, and makes him his slave or sells him, that kidnapper must die. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. When there is an outbreak of Sesaret, be careful to observe and do just what the Kohanim, who are Leviim, teach you. Take care to do as I ordered them. Remember that Adonai your God did to Miriam on the road after you left Egypt. When you take any kind of loan to your neighbor, you're not to enter his house to take his collateral. You must stand outside, and the borrower will bring the collateral outside to you. If he is poor, you are not to go to bed with what he gave as collateral in your possession. Rather, you must restore the pledged item at sunset. Then he will go to sleep wearing his garment and bless you. This will be an upright deed of yours before Adonai, your God. You're not to exploit a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether one of your brothers or a foreigner living in your land in your town. You are to pay him his wages the day he earns them, before sunset, for he is poor. and looks forward to being paid. Otherwise, he will cry out against you to Adonai, and it will be your sin. Fathers are not to be executed for the children, nor are children to be executed for the fathers. Every person will be executed for his own sin. You are not to deprive the foreigner or the orphan of the justice which is his due, and you're not to take a widow's clothing as collateral for a loan. Rather, remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and Adonai your God redeemed you from there. That is why I'm ordering you to do this. When harvesting the grain in your field, if you forgot a sheaf of grain there, you're not to go back and get it. It will remain there for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, so that Adonai your God will bless you in all the work you do. When you beat your olive tree, you're not to go back over the branches again. The olives that are left will be for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes from your vineyard, you're not to return and pick grapes a second time. What is left will be for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. That is why I'm ordering you to do this. Chapter 25. If people have a dispute, seek its resolution in court, and the judges render a decision in favor of the righteous one and condemning the wicked one. Then, if the wicked one deserves to be flogged, the judge is to have him lie down and be flogged in his presence. The number of strokes is to be proportionate to his offense. But the maximum number is 40. He is not to exceed this. If he goes over this limit and beats him more than this, your brother will be humiliated before your eyes. You are not to muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. If brothers live together and one of them dies childless, his widow is not to marry someone unrelated to him. Her husband's brother is to go to her and perform the duty of a brother-in-law by marrying her. The first child she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, so that his name will not be eliminated from Israel. If the man does not wish to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow is to go up to the gate to the leaders and say, "My brother-in-law refuses to raise up for his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother for me." The leaders of his town are to summon him and speak to him. If on appearing before them he continues to say, "I don't want to marry her," then his brother's widow is to approach him in the presence of the leaders, pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and say, "This is what is done to the man who refuses to build up his brother's family." From that time on, his family is to be known in Israel as the family of the man who had his sandal pulled off. If men are fighting with each other, and the wife of one comes up to help her husband get away from the man attacking him by grabbing the attacker's private parts with her hand, you're to cut off her hand. Show no pity. You're not to have in your pack 2 sets of weights, one heavy, the other light. You're not to have in your house 2 sets of measure, one big, the other small. You are to have a correct and fair weight. You are to have a correct and fair measure, so that you will prolong your days in the land Adonai your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who deal dishonestly, are detestable to Adonai your God. Remember what Amalek did to you on the road as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you by the road, attacked those in the rear, those who were exhausted and straggling behind when you were tired and weary. He did not fear God. Therefore, when Adonai your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in the land Adonai your God is giving you as your inheritance to possess, you are to blot out all memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. Well, we finished this parashah reading today, this Torah portion. But I want to direct your attention to the previous 2 weeks' Torah portions as well. So I put them on the board here, the parashah, the one we did today at Teitzei Deut. Yep. Yeah, Teitzei. But we did Re'eh a couple weeks ago, and then Shoftim last week. The sages, the rabbinic sages, have identified 613 commandments within the Torah. 613 commandments. Seems like a large number, doesn't it? 613 commandments. We say, well, okay, I know the 10 commandments, and they often stand in lieu of the 613. The 613 are more specific. Those 10 are general headings. The 613 that are enumerated by the rabbinic sages are scattered throughout the 5 books of the Torah. But what we find here in these last 3 parashahs is 28% of them. That's quite a substantial number, the 3 parashahs that are listed there. And so in Re'eh, 8%. Shoftim, 7%. But here in Teitzei, 12%. 12%. 74 of the 613 commandments in the section that we read today. We said, yeah, I kind of got that idea. It was like, it almost seemed disjointed. And on a cursory reading, it might seem that way. But it's not. There is a plan, there's organization, there's thematic analysis, helps us to see how these pieces of what appear to be a puzzle fit together. And that is something that Tony Robinson has done a great service with us in this section. So you have your handouts. How many? You have your handouts with you? Look over there. Good, good, good. So first thing, do you have any questions, or what questions do you have on the Torah portion today? Well, okay. I would like to direct your attention to your handout. The section, 3rd page. It starts at the top with the establishment. I'm not sure if mine, exactly. I didn't get a handout today, so I don't know what the pages are.
Oh, you want this one?
I just wanted to look at the page. 6. Page 6. Yeah.
Got it.
All right. Page 6. Oh, thank you. Okay. So if you look at page 6, you'll see that down at the, let's see, at the top there, just after that sentence that says establish, you see there's a question that says, do you remember the key phrase that was repeated numerous times in Parashat Re'eh? Now that was 2 weeks ago. Does anyone remember the key phrase? Yes?
Only because I read the answer this morning.
The place. Makom. Right, very good. Excellent, that's good. And in fact, if you had flipped to the back of your handout, you probably could have found the answer because the footnote is listed there as well. But that's good. And that's what we're to do. That's why we get the handouts, right? So we can do that. So the place. And this is the place where your God, Adonai, Elohim, dwells. The place. The place is Jerusalem. And by extension, of course, the temple. This is the place. And so what we find in Re'eh and Shoftim are commandments related to the nation of Israel. Oh, wow, that is so profound. Well, perhaps. These are commands that the individuals all share in common and direct to the relationship, their vertical relationship with God and with each other on a national level. What we have here in Teitzei, as opposed to the other two portions, these 12% of the commandments that are listed in this parasha deal with the individual, not the national. These, what we read today, are individual commandments and responsibilities that, as you see, affect your horizontal relationship with others. These deal with relationships. Very specific commandments dealing with relationships, duties and responsibilities, justice, dealing with the foreigners, strangers, widows and orphans, sexual relationships. These all have to do it covers a wide range of areas, from prostitution, from even rape. And in many cases, there were people, you had to be put to death because of the wickedness, to prevent the wickedness within the land. Within the land. The focus of this is God's place. By extension, that is the entire land of Israel. One of the reasons why we call this the Holy Land is God's special place that he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants. And we, by extension, grafted in, as we are part of Israel, the land of Israel. This is what we see from the portion of this Torah, how important that is from a national point of view and even to the individual. Relationships. And what does this accomplish? Well, part of what it accomplishes is the separateness, the holiness, the alignment, the identification with God. The identification with God. The ownership, the responsibility that goes with that. And that is accentuated at the very end with Amalek. Because Amalek finds no forgiveness. Because Amalek is God's enemy. And if he is God's enemy, and we are his, then Amalek is our enemy as well. Why is Amalek singled out in this way? Well, turn to page in your handout. Oh, yeah. Okay. 10. Yes, page 10. At the top of page 10. You see this passage of Scripture. These just a few verses here, but they are a chiastic structure. And Tony has pointed out to us that oftentimes that helps us to bring the thematic analysis to the fore. And so what he's done here is he showed you the chiastic structure. He has A, B, C, D. That's the center. Then C1, B1, A1. And so what he has here, he says, these three verses follow this chiastic structure. So, the first one there is the command, the mitzvah, to remember what Amalek did to Israel. Then, the emphasis on where and how the event occurred on the way. C, Am Yisrael, that means people of Israel. Am Yisrael, physical condition during the attack. And then the point, the central point. Amalek did not fear Adonai. Amalek did not fear Adonai. What? When did this attack take place? In the wilderness, the stragglers, those that were ill, those that were weak, those that were famished, those that were old, those that were little, the children, those at the very end, the stragglers. Amalek showed no mercy. He ambushed them and slaughtered them. Amalek. He showed no mercy. He showed no fear of God. And they had just come from Egypt, where God himself defeated, utterly routed the entire nation, the most powerful nation in the world. God put that judgment upon. With great power he led them. Even with that example, Amalek had no fear of God. Amalek was the enemy of God. Amalek is an ally of Hasatan. So that should help us to understand this commandment, the ending of this whole section. It says, who do you identify with? Who do you stand beside? God has stood by you and for you. We stand against the enemies of God. Now, if you look at page 8. Page 8. Page 8. In fact, let's, page 8. There's this interesting section here. It's fascinating. If you look at the chart that Tony Robinson has done for us on page 8, we have scripture references. Now, Devarim, of course, means words. It's words. It's a sermon. This whole book is a sermon, for the most part, of Moses to the people of Israel before he dies, before they enter into the promised land. Right? So here it is, the Devarim Deuteronomy, and these sections here identifies the Ten Commandments. These are specifically worked out. These are all elements that identify with the Ten Commandments. If you look on page 7, halfway down, you'll see the reference to Devarim 4:13. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. So, the 10 Commandments are referred to as a covenant. Yet here we see on this chart that the commandments are part of the thematic analysis in this entire section here, in Moses' entire speech. So we see the Devarim, we see a following of the commandments. And in fact, for the most part, they follow in sequence. You have the first and second commandment, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. But if you look at the scripture references, they follow in sequence as well, except for one. Except for one, which also should cause us to think, wow, why is that one out of place? Why is that one? That should stimulate our thinking in that regard. By the way, I don't know, okay? So don't look to me to answer that question, right? I don't know. At least at this point, I don't know. So, but that's something that is still, a point is we reflect on it, we think about it. And we try to figure out what is going on here. And what is the theme that relates to the 10 Commandments? The first and second commandment, faith in Adonai and rejection of idolatry. Honoring the name. Sanctification of time. That's Shabbat. Respecting authority. Honoring your father and mother. That's the basis for respecting authority. If you don't obey your mother and father, if you don't respect your mother and father, you're going to have a very hard life. Because you're going to be at odds with just about everybody. The law doesn't mean anything to you. You'll do what you can and get away with it, if you can, till you get caught. Will you be able to hold a job? Not if you don't follow the boss's orders. Right, boss? Right. That's a matter of authority. Right? Okay. Sanctification of life. Sanctification of intimacy. Sanctification of property. Sanctification of truth. Now, that's the one that is out of place here. It's the 9th commandment. But look at the verses. That goes back to 19, 15 through 21. Just between respecting authority and the sanctification of life, we have the sanctification of truth. Well, there's some connection there. Don't know what it is, but some connection there. Oh, okay. Bearing false witness. Yeah, that has to do with truth, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the 9th commandment, right?
9th commandment, right. So,
Connected to you shall not murder.
and there's some of that we see in this section too. That's bearing false witness. For example, bearing false witness. Okay, to bear false witness means you have to lie, right? So you've already identified yourself as someone who lies. So maybe you're not somebody that bears false witness with somebody, but you have a propensity for not telling the truth. And maybe you habitually tell lies. Many of us do. We call them, we give them different colors so that they don't seem as bad. You know, the white lie, you know, that's not. Bearing false witness, well, that's definitely a black lie. Right? Okay. But, you know, white lie. You know. Now, somebody asked me, you know, how are you? And I said, I'm fine. I'm feeling terrible, you know, but, you know, it's just to be polite and not to get into a big conversation. Well, okay, that's a white lie. Okay, all right. So anyway, but say you habitually lie, you actually identify with lying to get your way, to find some advantage, to convince people by telling them something as if it's true, but it's not, whatever the rationale is there, then you are on dangerous ground because you are moving towards this bearing a false witness because you already have to be a liar. You're not going to be convincing if you're not a good liar.
Stevie?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So in the New Testament, it talks, in the New Testament, it talks about the condition of your heart. Okay, let me give a parallel to that.
Yeah.
Everybody asks me, are you okay? Because everybody now knows I have cancer. And Mike asked me this morning, he said, how are you? I said, I'm fine, I'm great. Well, yes, I have cancer, but I'm fine and great. That doesn't make me a liar. Because, I mean, it's a condition of the heart. I'm feeling good.
Right. Yeah, I was just using that as an illustration. I wasn't picking on you specifically.
No, I know that.
Yeah,
No, I know that. It's just that I think that we need to remember
Well,
that
that's
with
true.
lying, that it is a condition of the heart if you are.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's a very good point, because that comes into the area of truth and covetousness.
Right.
Covetousness is an area of the heart. Of all of the 10 commandments, how do you know coveting? That's only, you know your heart, God knows your heart. So the heart is always been God's greatest concern, so we find no difference or distinction there. It's the same. It's the same. And so these commandments are to help us. How do they help us? Because God promises that they will bring us life. They will bring us blessing in this physical life. Yeah, right now. Right now. Not pie in the sky by and by when we die. But right now. Blessings. Really hard, concrete blessings to help us get through life. Right? And to enjoy life. Not death. The focus is not on death. The focus is on life. Okay? That's what and it is indeed, and I'm glad you brought that up, Pig. It is indeed a matter of the heart. It's always been a matter of the heart to God. Always. Okay? Okay, so anyway, I think that's a very helpful chart to reflect on as well. Yeah. Let's see. What we got here? Okay. Oh, yeah. And we've talked about this before. It's been a while. Been a long time. Back in Exodus, in fact, when we were covering Exodus. If you turn to page 11. Let me see. Yeah, 11. Page 11. Okay, here's another chiastic structure that is based on Exodus. And Exodus 17, 8 through 16. So you have these verses here. A1, B1, C, B2, A2. All right? And so this is from Exodus. And so this is dealing with the battle with Amalek. There actually was the battle there. Remember when Moses was holding his arms up and his brother had to help him? And do you remember who the other person was that was holding up the other arm?
Aaron.
Besides Aaron, there was Moses. Aaron was holding up one arm. Who was holding up the other? Who was it? Okay. All right. Yeah. So, and as long as he kept the arm up. So that's what we have here. We have the initial attack in preparation and the battle's teetering back and forth, right? Then, the central point, there is the strengthening of Moses' arms. Hands, I should say. It's the hat. Okay. The hands. And then, what happens then? Joshua, who's leading the forces of Israel, prevails in battle. And then the last part is the conflict, broadens the conflict on forever. So we have the initial attack by Amalek, but at the end we have God's attack upon Amalek. All right? So the victory is assured. So we see that. But so anyway, there's a couple chiastic structures for us to reflect on today. Great little handout for you to learn some more on thematic analysis, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.